All right. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm sorry to interrupt all of this great conversation, but I have to do so because we're going to have a great conversation in a few minutes up here. Well, welcome to the American Philosophical Society. I see some familiar faces, and I also see some new faces. My name is Patrick Spiro. I'm the Executive Officer of the Philosophical Society, and we are thrilled to be hosting this event tonight, this conversation we're going to have that's going to explore Spain and the American Revolution, which I believe is an overlooked but essential and important part of studying the American Revolution, and Benjamin Franklin's relationship to Spain. And we've pulled together a group of scholars who are the experts on this field. So I have been waiting and looking forward to this conversation for quite some time. And I want to thank Begonia Santos, the CEO of the Queen Sofia Institute, for bringing us, Spanish Institute, for bringing us together, for really pushing this idea. We're thrilled to host you all. Tonight is a very special event because in some ways it gets at the heart of why the American Philosophical Society was founded. The APS was founded, for those that are new here, in 1743 by Benjamin Franklin. And it was an inspired idea at the time, and it's an inspired institution today, almost 300 years later. The society was formed to bring people together, to share ideas with each other, and then disseminate the best ideas around the world. And you can see that actually in our founding document. The proposal for promoting useful knowledge, and that is actually the APS's full name, the American Philosophical Society, held at Philadelphia, for promoting useful knowledge. And that is our mission, to advance knowledge by bringing people together to talk ideas and then share those with the rest of the world. And you can see that is outlined explicitly in this proposal, to communicate to each other their observations, to disperse copies of communications that are as valuable to other distant members, not just here in America, but abroad, and to procure their sentiments thereon. So they wanted to get ideas from those that are far away, to share ideas. It was all about the free exchange of ideas, an Enlightenment idea that is still essential to our world today. So the APS was thought of as a node that was to connect people, and today we continue in that same tradition. Today the society has over 850 elected resident members in the United States, but we have over 100 international members. We have meetings throughout the year, meetings like this, but we also have international convenings, connecting with our peers abroad. And in the coming years, the Society wants to do more to connect with their peers outside of the United States. And I'm happy to announce a couple of coming events. The library is hosting 2 conferences internationally in 2026, one in Hong Kong and another one in France, to explore the American Revolution, democracy, self-sovereignty. And in July of 2026, the Society is partnering with the Royal Society in London to host a major international convening in London in July of 2026. So I hope you'll keep your eyes peeled to learn more about these events, and maybe might join us outside of Philadelphia for some of those. We also have a press, and this, in the 18th century, was one of the main ways ideas were disseminated. The Transactions are the longest continuously published scholarly imprint in North America. It's been in publications in 1771, and the idea in the 18th century was print was the best way to share ideas. Of course, today we're streaming live and we're disseminating in new digital mediums, but Transactions is still with us, and we still undertake exchanges with over 100, I believe, Michelle, international peers, where we send our publications to them, and then they send them back to us. So this idea that Franklin created, we're still serving today, almost 300 years later. And then research. We provide over 300 research grants a year on all 7 continents of the globe. So we're really, and many of these are early career scholars, so we're really trying to incubate the next generation of pioneers here at the Philosophical Society. And all of this was inspired by Benjamin Franklin and other civically minded individuals in 1743. We continue in that spirit today. And Franklin, in many ways, was the embodiment of diplomacy, of international collaboration, and of the importance of the free exchange of ideas. And with that, I'd like to call up the Consul for Cultural Affairs, Pedro Calvo Sotelo, who's going to say a few words about Spain and America, and we're thrilled to have him today as a guest.
Good evening. It is, of course, an honor, Mr. Chairman, to share this session with you in this American Philosophical Society. Since I entered the diplomatic service almost 40 years ago, I have held every position in the foreign service in 3 continents. And I am now Spain's Consul for Cultural Affairs based in New York. Being a diplomat, I think one should be a Spanish diplomat, particularly happy to be here in this city that welcomed for the first time Spanish diplomats, Juan de Miralles and Diego de Gardoqui, almost 250 years ago, the first Spanish diplomats to America. My congratulations to the organizers, the Queen Sofia Spanish Institute, and of course the American Philosophical Society, and to the panelists, also congratulations. We join this session and the commemorations about the common history of America and Spain. Allow me to quote the words spoken at Harvard University by a former Georgetown student, currently Don Felipe VI, the King of Spain. And he said the following: Spain is an American nation. Yes, Spain is an American nation, but perhaps also the American hemisphere is and will remain a deeply Hispanic continent because of its history, culture, language, geopolitics, and economy. You may also know this beautiful story when the great German scholar and explorer Alexander von Humboldt visited America. He met a man in the capital of the Viceroyalty of New Spain, Nueva España, south of Wyoming, from California to Texas, concerning the current territory of the United States. And he asked him, ¿Es usted español? Are you a Spaniard? And to which the man answered, No, señor, soy español americano. No, sir, I'm a Spanish American. So it is true. Let me just finish saying that my office, the cultural office in New York, based in New York, wishes to collaborate with Philadelphia institutions to organize more cultural and scientific events, continuing this fruitful 250 years of history that started in this city between the United States and Spain. And the second thing is that after an absence of almost 15 years, we are very pleased to have reopened the honorary consulate of Spain in Philadelphia, as Peter knows. And we are very grateful to Madeleine Bell, the CEO of the Children's Hospital, for agreeing to be our honorary consul here in Philadelphia. So she and I, we are at your disposal. Thanks, muchas gracias. And now, Begoña Santos, the CEO of the Queen Sofia Spanish Institute, has the word.
Good evening. It is truly an honor to present this collaboration between the QSSI, the Consulate General of Spain in New York, and the American Philosophical Society. Our appreciation to CEO Patrick Spiro and his team for their warm welcome, and especially to Professor Richard Kagan, member of the board of the Queen Sofia Spanish Institute and, of course, of the APS. I would like to briefly present to you, I'm sorry if I find the work of the Queen Sofia Spanish Institute, an institution established in 1954 by a group of American Hispanophiles with the objective of stimulating in the United States the interest in the culture, the art, the literature, the history of Spain, and to promote among Spanish-speaking people knowledge and understanding of the ideals, culture, and customs of the people of the United States. The QSSI is named after its patroness of honor, Her Majesty Queen Sofia, the mother of King Felipe VI. The Queen Sofia Spanish Institute develops its mission in different areas of work, in history, literature, through translation prize, translation fellowships, projects in public art, in education, the award for Hispanic excellence, and in the performing arts. But we're here today, most importantly, to talk briefly about the American Spain 250 initiative, which the Queen Sofia Spanish Institute launched on July 4th, 2023. The objectives of this initiative is to increase public awareness of the contributions of Spain to the history and development of the United States, to celebrate the 250 years of shared history in different fields, to facilitate the recognition of Spain in the celebrations of America 250, and finally, to promote awareness among Hispanic and Latino communities, descendants of those Spanish Americans that Calvo Sotelo was mentioning, of their foundational role in the history of the United States. The initiative is structured through its academic advisory committee, where we are privileged to have the advice of professors from a number of prestigious universities and partners both in Spain and in the United States. The work of the initiative is threefold through what we call our signature events. Those are high-profile events with higher impact and higher press. Our grassroots outreach project, through which we get in touch with an institution, a local historical association, and we propose the celebration of at least one event that will showcase the contribution of Spain to the American Revolution in their area. And finally, through the educational programming and resources that we distribute. The Grassroots Outreach Project has taken us to all these parts of the United States, and I have to say the desire to know about the Spanish contribution has been truly, truly touching. And at this point, the QSSI is honored to present today the APS with a high-quality facsimile of the appointment by Spain's Royal Academy of History of Dr. Franklin as an honorary member of the Academy. The Academy's Book of Records shows in an entry dated July 9th, 1784, that, and I quote, Dr. Benjamin Franklin, plenipotentiary minister of the Septentrional United States of America to the Court of Paris, has gifted one complete copy of his work, especially his political oeuvre, to the most illustrious director. In consideration of what has been stated and of the well-deserved reputation generally held of Dr. Franklin as a renowned politician and scholar, and also as a member of the principal academies of Europe, and in view of the presentation made by the Philosophical Society of Philadelphia, the Society proposed to the Academy to admit him as an honorary member. It was unanimously agreed to admit him into the relevant classes. And you can see the copies of this Book of Records, of the Royal Academy of History Book of Records, in these two cases. Pedro Rodríguez de Campomanes, the longtime director of Spain's Royal Academy of History, had been named a member of the Philosophical Society. In his words, the honorable notice that the Philosophical Society of Philadelphia has taken of me in naming me on January 16 to be one of their members places on me the agreeable obligation to demonstrate my gratitude through your excellency as its worthy president. It is thus a pleasure to showcase this historical connection between the then young United States and Spain as part of the QSSI American Spain 250 initiative. Thank you very much. Professor Kagan will now lead the roundtable.
Thank you and good evening, and thank you for all coming to be with us on this rainy evening. Today is Constitution Day, correct, Patrick? Well, a little known fact, the first complete Spanish translation of the United States Constitution, published in 1810, was done in Philadelphia by a man originally from Caracas, Manuel García de Sena. The Spanish government at the time considered it a subversive work, partly because he also included copies of the Constitution of Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and other states, which he wanted to have his compatriots in Venezuela copy. So this is an important day. But before I begin my brief remarks, I want to have a little quiz. How many of you here have heard of the Marquis de Lafayette? How many have heard of the Count of Rochambeau? That's good. How many have heard of Bernardo de Galvez. Many fewer. How about Francisco Saavedra? Many fewer. Well, Galvez, of course, was the Spanish officer who engineered a series of brilliant victories over various British outposts, Louisiana and what is now West Florida, and which culminated in the surrender of the strategic British outpost at Pensacola in the spring of 1781. Now, Pensacola, you ask? How many of you ever heard of the siege or battle of Pensacola? As compared, for example, to that of Trenton, Saratoga, Mammoth. I could add cowpens in South Carolina, but that would be cheating. Now, the imbalance in this little quiz or poll is no surprise, because save for a portrait of an American soldier, a man by the name of Stephen Minor, who fought alongside the Spaniards in Pensacola, there's no reference to that battle, nor to Galvez in the core exhibits of a museum just down the street, the Museum of the American Revolution. Now, there's one reason for this lacuna. Neither Galvez nor Pensacola, let alone other Spanish contributions to the war effort, whether in terms of ammunition or supplies, money or men, figure in the standard accounts of the American Revolutionary War. Nor is that lacuna anything new. The first historians of that conflict, and here I'm thinking of David Ramsay in the 1780s and 90s, and the first woman to write about that event, that war, Mercy Otis Warren, writing in Massachusetts, had very little to say either about Pensacola, let alone Galvez. In recent years, however, a number of scholars have been laboring diligently to cast new light on this particular but long neglected aspect of the war. And we're fortunate to have three of them with us this evening. I will introduce each of them one by one, and then to get the conversation going, I'll pose each of them some questions pertaining to their recent writings and research. And then afterwards, and in keeping with the customary practice of the APS, I would like to open the conversations to questions from the audience. Now, the three individuals in question, and I will introduce them one by one, and then I'll invite them up here. Or maybe, should they come up first? Doesn't make it. Gabe Paquette is the interim provost, professor of history, and director of the University Press at the University of Maine. He previously held a variety of research and teaching leadership appointments at the University of Oregon, Johns Hopkins, Harvard, Cambridge, and Wesleyan University, his alma mater. Gabe's most recent single-author book is European Seaborne Empires, Yale 2019. But his inclusion in this evening's panel is due to his contributions, many contributions to the study of Iberian and Ibero-Atlantic history in the age of revolutions. And this contribution includes serving as the co-editor, together with Gonzalo Quintero, who's also here with us tonight, his contribution to the book, to the volume, Spain and the American Revolution, which was recently republished in the second edition by the University of Virginia Press in 2002. Our second speaker is, conversationalist, is Professor Thomas Chávez, former director of the Palace of Governor's State History Museum in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and the National Hispanic Cultural Center in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Thomas Chávez is a member of Spain's Royal Academy of History. He's born in, he's a native New Mexican. He's the author of 15 books, but perhaps he's best known for his Spain and the Independence of the United States, an intrinsic gift, originally published in 2002. And his recent publications include The Diplomacy of Independence, Benjamin Franklin Documents in the Archives of Spain, which was published jointly by the Penn Press and the APS earlier this year, and also Revolutionary Diplomacy, Spanish Connections, and the Birth of the United States, published by the University of Virginia. And And our third conversationalist is Gonzalo Quintero Saravia. He holds 2 doctorates, not just one. One in the history of the Americas from the Universidad Complutense of Madrid, and another in public law from Spain's National Distance Learning University. He too, like Chávez, is a corresponding member of the Royal Academy of History. He's also a corresponding member of the Colombian Academy of History, and he's been a fellow at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard University. His book, Bernardo de Galvez, Spanish Hero of the American Revolution, was awarded the Distinguished Book Award for the Society of Military History for the best biography published in 2018. And it will be released in a paperback edition next spring. And his latest book, The Enemy of My Enemy, Spain and the American War of Independence, 1775 to 1783, will be published in Spanish next month and in English sometime next year. And I should say in his spare time, he's a diplomat. He served in various positions in Bogota, Lima, Washington, New York, as well as Pakistan. I don't know how he does it all. So I'd like all 3 of them to come up, and then I'll pose the questions.
Thank you, Richard.
I'm in the middle. This is Gonzalo, Chávez, and the young one. I'm the old one in this group. So the older guy here is going to pose to the youngest the first question. Hope you don't mind that, Gabe. He's my former colleague at Johns Hopkins.
Good to see you again.
Now, Gabe, your books upon many different aspects of the Atlantic world during the 18th century. You've written a lot of them. Particular emphasis on upon the overseas empires of Great Britain, of France, along with Portugal and Spain. Generally speaking, moreover, American observers observers in this country, thought of Spain as something of a spent power, one that achieved greatness during the 16th century, the age of exportations, starting with Columbus, of course, but a country that by the 18th century was steeped in decadence and decline. Certainly this was the image of Spain that most of this country's founding fathers, including those 3 behind me, had in their heads. Were they correct?
Well, thank you for the question. Great to see you again. Thanks, everyone, for being here this evening. It's a real honor to be here. Thanks very much to the sponsors. Were they correct? There's a temptation to say, no, they were not. And I'll get to that in a second. But I think the first is that...
Okay, I'll take you on it.
I think they could be, forgiven for having certain prejudices that were perhaps sectarian in nature, that were born of being British subjects in the Americas. They had imbibed a certain anti-Catholicism, and of course, there was sort of a rivalry with Spain, bred a certain competitive disdain, one might say. They may have been correct, however, when you look at sort of the ways in which Spain had suffered at British hands, chiefly, some pretty significant defeats in the decades and almost the century preceding the American Revolution. Those included, for example, faring very poorly in the War of Spanish Succession, the loss of Gibraltar, which we'll probably get to later on. And of course then the various incursions of the British into the Caribbean, Jamaica, for example. So I think they would be forgiven for thinking that in many senses Spain was a declining power. Certainly if you compare 17th century art and 18th century art before Goya, you might also reach that same conclusion.
Right.
But I think that there was also a lack of familiarity altogether with what was actually happening in Spain, especially basically from the end of the 7 Years' War in 1763 until the beginning of the American Revolution, where there was a very impressive reform program that was put in place, but perhaps had not yet penetrated the consciousness of the founding fathers by the time the American Revolution rolled around. But I know I'll have more to say about that, but that's a preliminary answer.
It's true. I think when John Jay was in Madrid trying to get some money out of the Spanish king. He said, he said about the Spaniards, they're in total darkness about us in America. It was also, the contrary was also true. Americans knew very little about Spain, save for one institution, which was part of the so-called Black Legend. They knew about the Inquisition, a little more.
Okay.
Little more. Gonzalo, or Mr. Ambassador to be correct. While most Americans are aware that France aided the colonies in their war for independence against Great Britain, few knew much about the assistance provided by Spain. We had the little straw poll here this evening. Was that aid financial? Was it military? Was it purely ideological? Or some combination of same?
Of course, there was combination, and thank you very much for having me here among these long friends. It's an honor to be at the EPS today. It's such an honor as a Spaniard and as a historian. Thank you very much. It's a combination of both. The first thing we have to understand in the American Revolution, it was all the contenders were not defending nothing but their own national interests. So when France decided to enter the fight, it was because it was a good thing for France.
That's in 1770.
78. When Spain decided to enter the combat, she does it so because it was international interest. And everything that the Continental Congress did was in their own national interest, so the British. So there's no good guys here helping other guys to be independent or something like that. Also, this is an old thing that happened all along in the history between Britain or England and Spain. You're always supporting those guys who are creating problems in the territory of your enemies. So in Spain, for example, there are several schools in several cities in Spain that were founded in the 16th and 17th century in order to educate Catholic priests that they were sent to England, Scotland, or Ireland to create problems in England, Scotland, and Ireland. When Spain had problems inside their own territories, the British were more than willing to help those rebels inside the Spanish territories. And when the Brits have those problems inside the 13 colonies, the Spaniards say, okay, let's help them from the very beginning. And they started even before the shot heard all around the world. 2 months before Trenton, Spanish merchants were sending or trying to find pistols and muskets to be sent to the rebels who had not already fired the first shot that was heard all around the world. So what Spain wanted to achieve is to create problems for the British. And at the end was, what does Spain prefer as a neighbor in North America? The might of the British Empire or 13 republics that are going to be weak, poor, no army, no navy, and they're going to be 13. At the time they were independent, nobody thought they were going to be forming just one state. The state came later on with the Constitution. But the Articles of Confederacy were not the Articles of one country. They were Articles of 13 countries. The treaty signed in Paris, or the treaties signed in Paris, were not by a country, by 13 countries which were independent. The United States, in the first documents, the U of United is not a capital letter, but a small one. That means it's not a country yet. The process of becoming a country of the US was done later on. And that time, republics were considered to be extremely weak and only successful in very small territories, like Venice or the Low Countries. So the expectation was, for the Spanish government, what do we prefer as a neighbor? The British might of the British Empire or 13 colonies that are going to be more manageable? The story proved different later on, but nobody could expect that.
Okay.
At the time.
In terms of material aid, I've always heard that there was a story that the blankets at Washington's army in Valley Forge, outside of Philadelphia, came from Spain. Is this true? Or
it is true, yeah. And not only that, but the uniforms. You see the uniforms of the Continental Army are red, blue, and white. And there was a shipment in early 76 and 77 of cloth from Spain of exactly those same colors.
Not from Balenciaga or somebody like that.
No. Not yet.
I would want to.
But not only that, ammunition, cannons, everything. First through done it secretly, okay, through Spanish merchants that had already contacts through the COT with the 13 colonies. And then directly by the Spanish monarchy, the Spanish government, through Havana first, and then going to New Orleans, and then up the Mississippi, and then to the first aid given by the French government and by the was the a company done Roderique and Hortalez, done by this playwright Beaumarchais. Thank you very much. By Beaumarchais. The founding capital of that firm was 1 million libras tornesas from the French government and 1 million tornesas from the Spanish government, half and half.
One of the individuals involved was the first Spanish minister, Gardoqui.
Yep.
He's from Bilbao in the north of Spain. For those who are interested, if you go to Logan Circle, just opposite the cathedral, there's a statue to Gardoqui, which was contributed by the Spanish government as a gift to Philadelphia in what magic year? 1976.
He was the first Spanish ambassador to the United States.
Envoy extraordinaire.
Because
the
at
minister
at that time, we only sent ambassadors to other monarchies because we considered, and that means all monarchies, we consider republics to be second-rate. So you were not in level as France, Britain, or something like that. So republics had minister plenipotentiaries and not ambassadors, but actually it's the same thing. Sorry, that's old protocol of an old nation that's more than 500 years old.
It's
Sorry.
good to know. Thomas, your latest book, The Diplomacy of Independence, I think it's your latest book, penultimate, Benjamin Franklin Documents in the Archives of Spain, published, as I mentioned, just last year by the, earlier this year or last year, by the APS. I wonder whether you can provide us with a brief summary of why you embarked on that particular project. And given that most of us, when we think of Franklin's career as a diplomat, we think about London, Paris comes to mind, but not Madrid. So what do these documents in your book tell us about Franklin's diplomatic career, especially with this country's relationship, or the future country's relationship to Spain?
So which part of this question should I answer?
Do it, whatever.
All of them. So what embarked me on that?
Well, why'd you begin on this? Start on this project.
Well, I guess I could say stupidity. Because what really happened was I was researching the book Spain and the Independence of the United States that you mentioned, and of course in the Spanish archives with a Fulbright fellowship. And in the archives of Spain, I recently hatched, PhD, came across these documents dealing with Benjamin Franklin. And I knew at that time that there was no one in this country had used those documents, when all the biographies of Franklin, actually up until currently, don't even mention Franklin's involvement with Spain at all. Even the most recent documentary that was on TV, and I know the guy that did it because he lives in Santa Fe, and I know he didn't use any information about Franklin in Spain. So over time, as I was doing other things, it just stayed in my mind, and I realized at a certain point that I couldn't do it in my lifetime. So I hired a team. Actually, I rounded up a team on a promise of getting paid, but because my life is in museums, that means I've spent a lot of time raising money for my museums, and I managed to raise the money to pay for the team. I had 4 scholars, 2 who live in Spain, 1 who works in the archives of the Indies, and we started. I had the documents that I used for the book, but we went back and started going through various archives to find more documents dealing with Franklin, and then we, some were in French, some small percentage in English, and then the majority in Spanish, and then we went through multi-filters translating them, and then the stupidity comes in. How can somebody with an apellido of Chávez from New Mexico, of all places, come up with a book dealing with Benjamin Franklin? Right? It just doesn't make sense to people back east. But happily, the first place that I thought should publish that book was the American Philosophical Society, for the very reason Franklin founded this place. And they did. And so I consider it one of the highlights of my career that they did that. It was published first, incidentally, in Spain in Spanish by the Universidad de Alcalá.
The Benjamin Franklin Center.
Yeah, the Benjamin Franklin Center. And then when the American Philosophical Society wanted to publish it, I submitted it in English. But the editorial board came back and said, well, we would like the documents in the original language along with the English. So I had to go back and redo the whole thing. And it's a better book for it, too. So that's how that happened. What was the rest of the question?
Franklin's connections with Spain or Madrid. He never really went to Spain, did he? And he sent Arthur Lee, and Lee never made it to Madrid either. They cut him off in Burgos in the north of Spain.
Yeah.
Coming from Paris.
Benjamin Franklin never set foot in Spain. But he did take documents and present them to the Conde de Aranda, the ambassador of Spain to Paris. And that document, signed by John Hancock and his oversized signature, I think he was probably nearsighted because everything he did, was big. But it named him minister to Spain. And Franklin handed Aranda an accompanying letter in Franklin's handwriting, which is in the National Archives of Spain, explaining that he had been named because of this document, and he used these words intentionally. I've been named Minister Plenipotentiary. So anybody who is an ambassador understands what that means. Mm-hmm. He's an ambassador. And they gave it to Aranda. Aranda had to explain, this wasn't the first time, to Franklin that that's fine, we'll receive these, but please don't go to Spain because we're a neutral country, we're sending covert aid to you, we don't want to blow the cover. I'm saying this in English terms, and don't do that. Franklin understood that, and so he never went to Spain. But I'm happy to say that sometimes we have an influence on things because now the embassy, the United States Embassy in Spain, has Franklin's photo up there as the first ambassador. So
certainly had a reputation in Spain.
They
knew about lightning and they knew a lot about others. And one of the reasons he got into the Royal Academy of History.
Yeah. So he had to deal with Spain through the Conde de Aranda, the ambassador, and he did, and it's a great story.
Well, thank you. Now we'll go back to Gabe. Now, you have to imagine a map in which we had if we had looked at a map of North America in 1776, just as Franklin's Paris, we look at that map of North America, and especially the vast territories located to the west of the Mississippi, all of that west of the Mississippi, it's all in Spanish hands. And we looked south, Louisiana, Florida. No, Florida's not quite there. California, Texas, most of the Southwest, even Albuquerque in New Mexico, they're all nominally, at least, nominally under Spanish control. Not many Spaniards, there's mostly indigenous peoples there, but nominally, if you look on the map, it belongs to Spain. Few Spaniards that ever went there, but they travel along certain routes and certain forts called presidios. Now, that's all that huge space, but by comparison, these 13 little colonies up and down the East Coast, they look rather puny geographically. So what can you tell us, Gabe, about the relationship between those colonies and Spain at that particular moment, 1776? Great power, 13 divided colonies.
Thank you. One of the paradoxes that I think strikes one when one is studying the subject is the disdain that many of the colonists had for Spain and its empire. Precisely when the territory that was controlled, the population of its major centers, GDP per capita, to the extent that you can calculate it, was vastly inferior to that of Spanish America. So when we think about Mexico City, we think about Havana, Lima, these were cities that dwarfed Philadelphia, New York, and Boston quite considerably. So you're absolutely right that in comparison, the 13 colonies are rather insignificant. Now, there had been great desire to penetrate Spanish-American markets from the early part of the 18th century. Perhaps the most important moment is I talked about the War of Spanish Succession in the early 18th century before. But one of the key things that Britain gained as a result of the treaties was the asiento, which is the exclusive right to import slaves into the Americas. So that was sort of an opening that they sought to use to sort of pry open Spanish-American markets. But Spain, managed, with the exception of, fending off corsairs and others from Jamaica, to essentially prevent the penetration of their vast markets from North Americans. And I think that was really one of the things that American colonists would hope to achieve in the aftermath of independence. But certainly, I would say the connections were not all that as robust as what one might think at that time.
Sugar from Cuba, tobacco from Venezuela.
Yeah, I mean it's there, but there's an important connection that's commercial, but it's not that direct relationship, because in the prevailing mercantilist system, that kind of trade was prohibited.
Huh. The first book really kind of documenting or trying to show how important Spanish America commercially could be for the United States was published where? Philadelphia, 1816, by a man named Manuel de Torres, who became the first ambassador from the new Republic of Colombia to the United States in 1822.
He's
Published
buried
his
here.
book in 1816. Then there was a guy called James Yard, also from Philadelphia. He said, no, it's not all that important. In the end, I think Torres
But he's buried here. Manuel Torres is buried here.
Torres is in the churchyard of St. Mary's, just on 3rd Street. Gonzalo, just a block from here, as I mentioned before, is the Museum of the American Revolution. You may have gone there today.
Yep.
There's several paintings of Lafayette, and I'm thinking, particularly thinking in particular the canvas depicting the siege of Georgetown in 1781, which features Lafayette standing alongside George Washington. On the other hand, nothing in the museum, as I mentioned before, features Bernardo de Galvez, the Spanish general whose biography you published, and who's known to make substantial, have made substantial contributions to the colonists' victory. So, who was this guy, Galvez? And what exactly did he do on behalf of the Americans?
Remember what I started with, that it's everything about national interest. Spain did nothing on behalf of the American rebels. Spain did everything on her own behalf. It would be suicidal to do things on behalf of someone else. It was in the interest of Spain to promote this kind of revolution. So she helped this revolution. But, and it's a huge but, they will never be allies of the Americans, because there was this thingy that, as you have already mentioned before, that the territories in the rest of the Americas, and I mean the Americas from north to south, would have the bad idea to copy these independence ideas from the British colonies and apply them to themselves, which never happened, by the way, because the independence of the Spanish colonies in the 19th century had a completely different origin, nothing to do with the influence of the 13 colonies. It was a completely different thing. But at the time, they were concerned about this bad example. So they were never allies of the United States, but that doesn't prevent the huge thing that was giving them lots of ammunition, arms, the blankets and whatever, but most importantly, diverting the British manpower, both naval and the armies, from being capable to concentrate against the Continental Army in the 13 colonies. Before the entrance of Spain in the war, the French and the United States were losing the war, actually. They're having lots of problems in coordinating their military operations and naval operations, and were losing the war. There was a huge pressure from France to Spain to enter the war. And when the moment Spain entered into the war, Spain imposed her own strategic priorities. The first action of France and Spain when they entered the war was an attempted invasion of England. An invasion of England that didn't want to conquer England, but to create a panic in the stock market that would force the British government to sue for peace. When that didn't work, they started to do several things. The main thing they did is focusing on attacking Gibraltar. That meant that most of the British Navy had to be not bombarding New York or bombarding Philadelphia, but preventing the Spaniards from conquering Gibraltar. Actually, Gibraltar, the Great Siege of Gibraltar and the Great Assault of Gibraltar in 1782 is the largest battle of the American Revolution, not Yorktown. But by far, by far. Also, the latest battle of the American Revolution is not a battle that was fought in North America. It was the conquest of New Providence by Spain in the Caribbean. So actually, what Spain did is preventing the British to concentrate their might against the Continental Army. That's why George Washington and the Continental Congress was very pissed off when the Spaniards got victory at Pensacola in 81. Why? Because when in the interest of the Congress, of the Continental Congress and the United States, was not that Spain was victorious, it's that Spain was fighting the Brits in North America. And since the Spanish were victorious in Pensacola, that battlefield completely stabilized, and the Brits were able to move the troops that were there before to reinforce New York, for example. And the Continental Congress was not happy about it. The thing is that the game changer was when Spain and France concentrated troops in what is today Haiti to embark on an invasion of Jamaica. The 13 colonies were part of the 20-something, 30-something colonies that the Brits had in this continent. The continent I'm talking about, the Americas. They were not the richest. The richest was Jamaica and the Sugar Islands. And when the Brits were confronted with the possibility of losing Jamaica by a joint operation by France and Spain that was mounted in Haiti, in Guarico, that's the reason why they started to think that, well, the war is going to be over, we should start negotiating. There was a battle, the Battle of the Saints, that actually prevented that invasion. But the invasion was being prepared, so the threat was there. And that threat of losing Jamaica was the key for the Brits to say, okay, enough is enough, 13 colonies, you can go over there, but we must retain the Sugar Islands, Jamaica. Sorry, too long.
No, that's perfect.
Another thing. When Gabe is one of the experts of imperial reform, you must bear in mind that the origin of the American Revolution is an unsuccessful or failed imperial reform of the British Empire in North America after 1963. But at the same time, the Spanish Empire was at the highlight of its reform, which actually completely succeeded with no problems at all. Small rebellions here and there, but that was normal in the old regime. So while the British Empire confronted a total failure in North America, at the same time, in the Americas, the Spanish Empire was being reformed, not only without problems, but also with a huge success, which is a completely different view that we have nowadays.
Thank you. All of the terms of the British capitulation at Pensacola were published in every Philadelphia newspaper in extenso, right? And you can, they're rarely read, but the Continental Congress and everyone in Philadelphia wanted to know what happened. First of all, they said, "Where's Pensacola?" And then they said, "What happened?"
And they didn't like it at all,
Yeah, no.
because the troops were forced to take an oath not to take arms against Spain or her allies.
Right. And
France.
they shipped them to New York.
And they said nothing about the U.S. because
Right.
the U.S. was not an ally. So
Right.
they shipped all those troops to New York, and they were not happy, of course.
So my last question, once again for Tomas, is let's go back to Benjamin Franklin, your guy, and those documents that are right here. As Begonia said, on July 9, 1784, Spain's Royal Academy honored Franklin with appointment as an honorary or corresponding member, like you and some of us. Unless I missed something in Franklin's CV, he's not much of a historian. In other words, normally people who've pointed to the Royal Academy history are historians. As we said, he'd never visited Spain. So what, in your estimation, might explain Franklin's appointment to that learned society in Madrid, or maybe more broadly, what was Franklin's reputation in 18th century Spain, let's say in 1784?
I believe Benjamin Franklin was more popular in Europe than he was in the 13 colonies. You know, after he died, the Senate refused to even pass a memorial for him. Whereas in Europe, his reputation as a philosopher, as an enlightened man, was well known, even in Spain. And while he was in Paris, negotiating over the war and then the peace, and then waiting to be recalled home, he corresponded with some of the Spanish enlightened thinkers. One of them was Pedro Rodriguez Companys. I want to say companions, but Companys. And Companys was the president of the Royal Academy of History. Somewhat controversial, incidentally, with a book he tried to translate, but that's another story. Companys was this learned man as well. He had done translation of Arabic and had those published by the Royal Society, and he was exchanging books with Benjamin Franklin. So Benjamin Franklin was that well known, and Franklin liked Companys, and so he had him inducted into the American Philosophical Society. And incidentally, the first Spanish ambassador, Gardoqui, also was inducted into this organization. Yeah. So this is good. The organization's becoming multilingual early on. Yes. In return, the board at the Royal Academy of History made a resolution. It's in their minutes, the books of their minutes at the Academy to this day. Got to see them. It was kind of neat. They have who gave the speeches on his behalf, and because they've been exchanging gifts, and because William Carmichael, who was left in Madrid to be the ambassador after John Jay was recalled to Paris, Carmichael presented the Royal Academy with a gift of Franklin's books to the Academy. And so because of all of this, and because he was such a learned man, and they went on, and you heard read earlier, by acclamation, he was admitted into the Royal Society. You know, one of my goals after I started researching Franklin is I need to get into the Royal Society just like Franklin, and they did it. So, so that was kind of cool. It's interesting to me that because of the exchange of the two societies, maybe the two societies should be talking to each other today about some kind of exchange or even a joint program. That would be really cool.
Really cool, yeah.
Let's work on it. Well, thank you for that. There were actually, between 1784 and 1804, 12 Spaniards were elected to membership in the APS. I could go through their names, but that would be boring. I'd rather really open this conversation to the audience. And if we have some time for some questions or queries, complaints, no eggs or no tomatoes, please.
to the founding of this country. I'm curious, the feedback
there's people
from
online
each
too,
Well,
Did you hear me?
I did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes, the question was why is it that after 250 years, there's virtually no awareness in this country about the nature of and the extent of Spain's contribution to the American Revolutionary War over time. Do you want to take this, or you want me to say something about it?
I'd be happy for you to, but I would just say it's not for lack of trying. But please, you go first, and then I'll jump in.
On Saturday at 12 o'clock in Washington, D.C., at the next event sponsored by the QSSI, I will be giving a 35-minute lecture on that precise topic. And it has to do largely with the two people I mentioned before. The historians of the 1780s and 90s, they couldn't possibly conceive. They knew, it was published in the papers, what Galvez had achieved, what was going on in the war with the Spaniards. But for them, Spain was the polar antithesis of the United States. This country was predicated on the notion of virtue. How could, in the eyes of really in Franklin or any other founding fathers, how could a country that has an institution known as the Inquisition have anything virtuous about it? It was represented, it was dominated by what they saw as a decadent, backward Roman Catholic Church that squelched learning and prevented industrial progress. So they said basically it was easy for them to get Clio, the muse of history, to close her eyes. And that's basically what happened with the first historians, David Ramsay and Warren. And if you go through the 19th century, it's the same story. George Bancroft, the great historian of the 19th century, he just said, impossible. And I go on about this. You look at every textbook, even those that are circulating today. Galvez is the major ones. Galvez is not in them, not there, nor is Pensacola. Now, there are people like these three have dedicated their lives. It's the recovery, interestingly, was a sectional problem. Most of the historians who wrote about the war came from where? The East Coast, particularly the Northeast. For them, Florida, Louisiana, it didn't make any difference. So the war for them was Saratoga and Yorktown. But you start looking at historians starting in the 19th century in Louisiana, in Florida, and then a little later in California. Their vision of the United States was very different from those guys in Massachusetts. They started to publish documents regarding Pensacola and Galvez, and they published in specialized magazines and monographs, and it came out for 100 years, but it didn't make a difference with the guys who were making the major textbooks. And so only now, thanks to these three, not me, I haven't done anything in that respect, they're beginning to change the eyes. And let's see what happens next month when Ken Burns airs his documentary of the American Revolution. I haven't seen any list of its contents. I'm just hoping Pensacola is going to be there, and Galvez as well. Maybe somebody knows about what Burns is going to say. So it's a historiographical issue.
No, listen, I appreciate your explanation, but I wanted responses by your panelists, if you'd be kind enough to invite them to respond
Sure.
on my question.
Okay.
What?
Thomas, please.
I didn't hear what he said.
He wants to know what you would have to say in response to that.
I would say, first of all, it's changing. And we're the acorns that before the forest up here. And it's changing in a number of different ways, even for me personally. My first book was not published here in the East Coast. I submitted it to a number of presses here. And they just couldn't believe that a person like me would have anything to do with their revolution. And so the University of New Mexico published it. And now the professors on the East Coast are reading my book, and my last two books were published here. So that in itself is significant. I went to the Revolutionary Museum today too, and my career was in museums. I appreciate the quality of the exhibit with certain exceptions, but it doesn't tell the whole story. It has one panel that deals with Spain, and the big painting or portrait there is of an American who fought with the Spanish rather than Galvez or Saavedra or anybody else, Langara, the naval captain. So it's not there. Then I looked in the bookstores here, even the bookstore for this organization. And none of our books are there. Not one of them. Not one of them.
He's the one complaining, not me. Okay.
So
I think ours must have sold out, right?
And it's not just ours up here. There are other scholars now writing books. I mean, it's starting to, one of the great pleasures of a historian is you find something and you research it and you publish it, and then before long you're a footnote in somebody else's book because they're using it. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's happened with me. So I can see that happening as well, but still we need to get out to the general public. That needs to happen. And I will say, too, that at the turn of the century, after the Spanish-American War, which was a continuation of what has been said here, our historians did start looking south, writing about that. And they looked at Spain, but they were more interested in exploration and that stuff. And then we get into our century and into the 30s and 40s, and we're more interested in writing about Franco and fascist Spain. And those people, one of the excuses is, oh, we couldn't read Spanish. Well, they could, and they were in the Spanish archives. It just never dawned on them, given the heritage that they had, inherited, that Spain had anything to do with their independence at all.
Right.
We have about 10 minutes remaining, so I'm wondering if we might want to move to another
No,
question.
it's okay.
Or another question. I will say, in all fairness, we don't have a bookstore at the APS. We have a itty-bitty podium outside our museum gallery. But it is available online. They're all available online. Next. Oh, I think, Paul Gill, you have the next question.
Well, let me say, as an historian of the American Revolutionary Republic, you're right. I think it is changing. We've become much more aware of your work. But I'd like to sort of shift the direction of the question a little bit. You've touched a little bit on indigenous people, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about how, and the phrase indigenous people includes a vast variety of peoples, especially when dealing with the Spanish North American Empire, but how relations with indigenous people helped the Spanish fighting their part of what we call the Revolutionary War. We can call it something else maybe, but, and two, how earlier you talked about this map and how really, in many ways, that map's the map of Spain dominating most of North America is misleading because indigenous people dominated most of North America. And how the indigenous people limited the power of Spain.
Right. Gonzalo, do you want to start?
On Saturday, we're having a panel at Washington, D.C. by Kathleen Duval, who's the expert on this. I wrote an article with her on Bernardo de Galvez and the relations with the Native Americans. You're absolutely right, actually. The thing is, Native Americans, they don't have a fixed photograph, okay? The populations move a lot during short periods of time. So the places where the different groups were in 1750 are absolutely different in 1775 and 1800s. And also the acceptance of Louisiana by Spain from the French, which was done with lots of problems. The final decision was, well, if we don't occupy Louisiana, the British will occupy Louisiana, and they are too near to our core New Spain. So when Spain acquired Louisiana, she had to change the Indian policy that was applied in the Northern Territories, which was a completely different one. They were settled there for centuries. They already had everything structured. But in this kind of borderlands that were studied by David Weber, it's different. It's fluid. So the model changed, and it was a model based basically on treaties with each and every one of these groups, which Spain was not accustomed to. They, at this time, it's called the conquest by treaty instead by conquest by the sword. So Spain signed treaties with all these different groups, not only in the southeast, but also from the Mississippi to the other place, in which they recognized as subjects of His Majesty the King, Spain, and in exchange, they will receive gifts, commerce, and recognition of their territory. And also, we must not consider Native Americans as a bloc fighting anyone. No, they're not a bloc. It's like Europe in the Middle Ages. Everyone is fighting with everyone. So, and sometimes this particular group is it's an alliance with another particular group against the Europeans, which at the time are French or British or Spaniards. But sometimes they are fighting other indigenous groups, and they require the assistance of the European there in order to settle the differences. So much of these treaties are because of that. And you're absolutely true what Richard said before, that there's a huge, beautiful map published in 1783 after the peace treaties, in which 2/3 of what is today continental US is Spanish. Well, is it Spanish? Yeah. But all maps are liars, okay? Every single map lies, okay? So in this case, they say it's Spanish because it's recognized by other European powers as Spanish. But actually, the guys that are in power there, and the respective Native American groups, but it depends on the period, it depends on where, it depends on who you're talking about, because it's always very fluid. But I recommend you to if you can, it's going to be transmitted by C-SPAN, I think, the things in Washington. Catherine Duval, who is the expert on these things, is delivering a lecture on this. And also, we'll have, sorry.
Come to the APS on October 7th.
Great.
So if you're interested in hearing about Kathleen and her discussion about her most recent book, which won the Pulitzer Prize in 2025, I encourage you to join us in the evening on October 7th here at the APS.
Great.
How much time do we have, Michelle?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Did you want to add anything, Gabe, to that?
On that particular point, no. I think if there are other
Okay.
questions, we can.
Other questions?
I would like to.
Thomas?
Now, there's a field of study called borderland study. We up here know that, maybe you don't. And it is the study of what is today northern Mexico and southwest of the United States. You heard earlier how insignificant the settlement was there. And he hurt my feelings because I'm a 13th generation New Mexican.
Yes.
My family was there in 1601 in the middle of the continent. And, that they planted their culture there. It's the only state in the country that's officially bilingual. Its flag is the colors of Spain. And so there was that influence. And the other thing is, I want to say about that, the southwest of the United States was part of the Spanish Empire longer than it has been part of the United States. Think about that.
Well put. That is true. And Santa Fe was the
capital.
Yeah, the capital.
When I was in Madrid, I happened to stumble across the Daughters of the American Revolution plaque across the street from the Madrid post office commemorating Spain's alliance with the United States. So I think at least some American organizations do have some awareness of that fact. But I was curious about Benjamin Franklin's admission to the Royal Academy of History in Madrid, in Spain, because I would have thought Franklin was known in Europe mostly as a scientist for his scientific work. So why the Royal Academy of History and not was there a Spanish Academy of Science that excluded Franklin for some reason, or did it not exist? Do we know?
There was no Royal Academy of Science per se at that time. The Royal Academy of History, when you get your PhD in history, it's in philosophy, right? Doctor of Philosophy. They had that attitude about historians and history. It was everything that was learned in a way. And so that's why he was admitted. Right. He was, I can't stress strong enough how popular he was in Europe. When he went to Paris, he had the choir to preach to.
Right.
And the people just loved him. And the Spanish did too.
One of the aims of the Royal Academy was founded in, I think, 1730s, was to establish truth about not only the past, to expunge myths, but also to learn about the present. And they embarked on various investigations having to do with Islamic Spain, indigenous cultures of Mexico and South America. And since Franklin's contributions to knowledge fits into that broader notion of philosophy as understood in the 18th century, not just the musings of people like Hegel or Kant. There was another Royal Academy in Spain of language, but that basically was interested in literature and in etymologies, not in the broader questions of philosophy. There is a Spanish Academy of Sciences as well, whose date I forget.
And Franklin, he sent to Campomanes an article he had written about the differences between what had become America, the colonies, and Europe. Pretty much talking about Europe's sense of, elitism and royalty and stuff, and criticizing it, and talking about, the ambitions and the individuality of what was being created here. Campomanes found that interesting. I don't think he agreed with it totally, because he himself was, a count. But they were exchanging ideas about the different societies. And Spain, not just Campomanes, but Spain was interested in and actually fascinated with what would become of these colonies. They understood they were populated by Europeans. And they were really curious how that, they were going to be, if they could stay together, which was mentioned, they were going to be a strong country. If they became separate states, which meant government back then, how would that work? And they part of the reason they got into the war was, Aranda's argument a little bit, was that if England kept the colonies, England would still be in the Americas. And both Grimaldi and Flores de Blanca, the two secretaries of state, saw that as a basis for England to attack Spanish ports in the Americas. And so they get England out of the picture. Maybe they can make friends with this new whatever entity that's going to develop and neutralize that.
And they did in 1795. Is that it?
Great. Yes, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to say, prompted by Harry's question and Tom's suggestion, I really hope that this is just the start of a conversation between the Philosophical Society and our collaborators in Spain, the Royal Academy of History, and the other academies.
You could do it here and in Madrid.
Great, and you know how to raise money, right? Isn't that what you said? Oh, thank you all. There are books available in the back.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.